The Rise and Fall of the Walking Dead by Jerry's Takes.
And The Walking Dead premiere pulled in 5.35 million viewers. By season 5, that number skyrocketed to 17.3 million. But then something changed. The final season, a mere 2.2 million viewers. The show's viewership plummeted dramatically. So what happened? Ladies and gentlemen, there's a clear rise and a series of inevitable falls that led to the mixed bag that ultimately became The Walking Dead that we know, love, and even at times hate. And in this video, we'll pinpoint the exact episodes where viewers started turning out en masse. Was it Carl's death, that dumpster fake out, or simply Walker fatigue that caused the exodus? By the end, you'll understand the factors behind this show's transformation from must-see TV to, maybe I'll catch it on streaming someday. Oh, and by the way, there is this white news. Let's break down the twists and turns that shaped The Walking Dead's journey. Remember 2010? Zombies were everywhere. Movies, video games, and even romantic comedies. But TV? That was a whole different story. Nobody thought that the undead could survive on the small screen. I mean, who wants to watch rotting corpses shuffle around week after week? Turns out, actually, a lot of people. AMC was riding high on the success of Mad Men and Breaking Bad, known for taking risks and turning them into gold. And when they decided to roll the dice on a zombie show, critics were righteously skeptical. Many couldn't see how a show about The Walking Dead could keep viewers coming back for more. But AMC had a plan. They decided to premiere the pilot at Comic-Con. Picture
And that kind of just seems crazy nowadays, like being like, oh, in the past being like, dude, a show about zombies and like killing zombies and trying to survive, dude, that's boring. But now looking back in the past, that seems so crazy that people wouldn't stop that.
Thousands of diehard genre fans packed in one place, all hungry for the next big thing. And when that pilot dropped, it created an instant frenzy. Suddenly, everyone was talking about The Walking Dead, and the buzz was real, and it was just spreading very fast. And when the show finally hit TV screens, 5.35 million viewers tuned in for the premiere. For cable TV in 2010, that wasn't just big, that was huge. And to put that in perspective, that's more than double of what Mad Men's season premiere pulled in that same year. AMC's gamble was paying off big time. The Walking Dead didn't just bring in numbers, it brought something new to television. This wasn't your typical horror show with cheap jump scares and forgettable characters. No, not at all. The Walking Dead was using zombies as a backdrop to explore human nature. What happens to society when everything falls apart? How far would you go to protect the people you love? These are the questions that kept people coming back week after week. The show's success proved that zombies could shamble their way into weekly television. But more than that, it showed that genre TV could be mainstream. The Walking Dead wasn't just for horror fans or comic book geeks. No, it was appointment viewing for millions of people from all walks of life. It was water cooler talk. It was trending on Twitter before we even knew what trending meant. And let's talk about those zombies for a second. The Walking Dead did not skimp on gore, but it wasn't just about shock value either. The show's makeup and effects teams were creating some of the most realistic and terrifying undead ever seen on screen. Every week, viewers were treated to a masterclass in practical effects. It was gruesome, sure, but it was also art. But here's the thing about The Walking Dead's explosive debut. It was just the beginning. The show had proven it could attract an audience, but could it keep them? Could it grow? The answer, as we know, was a resounding yes. But nobody could have predicted just how big this thing would get. Remember how nobody thought zombies could work on TV? Well, by season 5, The Walking Dead was pulling in a staggering 17.3 million viewers. That's more than most network shows. And how did a show about the undead become the most alive thing on television? The Walking Dead's audience growth was nothing short of extraordinary. Season after season, more viewers tuned in, defying expectations for a show in this genre. It wasn't just outperforming other cable shows, it was giving major network heavy hitters a run for their money. And the numbers kept climbing, smashing through every barrier anyone tried to put on it. But Here's the thing. It wasn't just about the gore. The zombies were cool, sure, but that's not what kept people coming back week after week. People were connecting with the characters and investing in the drama. They cared about this messed up world where survival wasn't guaranteed. Take Rick Grimes, for example. This guy starts off as your typical good cop, right? But as the show goes on, we see him change. He makes tough decisions, he crosses lines, and viewers are right there with him, asking themselves, what would I do in that situation? It's that kind of character development that turns casual viewers into fanatics. The Walking Dead didn't just give us a zombie apocalypse. It gave us a whole new society to think about. How would we rebuild? What rules would we follow?
And that's one thing I think makes Fear the Walking Dead very interesting with, hold on, my voice is a little weird, with making, so obviously Rick Grimes is the typical good guy and everything, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. A lot of shows do that. Breaking Bad, Walter White wasn't the typical good guy, but he was just a typical, normal type character. But with Fear the Walking Dead, each character started out not being, well, not each, I won't say each character, but most of the characters started out being not a typical good guy. Like, they weren't necessarily bad guys, but they were very, even from the start, they were very, people throw out the word morally gray, or the term morally gray. I'm just going to use that as well. Even from the start, they were very morally gray and everything, and they weren't necessarily good people. But obviously, nobody from the beginning would say that Rick wasn't a good person. The only thing maybe you could say against him is that when he was with Dwayne and Morgan and they were at the police station, he's like, oh yeah, we can just take the guns and everything. And then Morgan's like, oh, but isn't that stealing? He's like, oh, well, don't worry, we'll like give it back and everything. Because obviously Rick at this point thought that civilization would come back and everything. So in Morgan's mind, stealing, they were kind of stealing, and Rick was. Anyway, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's like maybe the most you could say. Someone could make an argument that there is something wrong with that.
It's the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night long after the credits roll in a way that a jump scare or something like that just can't achieve. And before long, The Walking Dead had become a cultural phenomenon. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing people talk about it. Water cooler conversations revolved around last night's episode. Social media was flooded with The Walking Dead memes and theories. And come Halloween, you bet there were zombies and Rick Grimes people everywhere. And don't even get me started about Talking Dead. AMC was so confident in The Walking Dead's pull that they created a whole other show just to talk about the show. And people watched it. Millions and millions of people watched it. When was the last time you saw that happen in a drama series? I mean, seriously, that just never happens. Talking Dead gave fans a place to process each shocking death. But what if those deaths...
That's actually true. Like, I've never seen that with another show, and maybe there is more of that now. But yeah, it definitely, at least in my opinion, definitely started with The Walking Dead. It might have started with other shows too, but got popularized with The Walking Dead.
Weren't just about keeping us on the edge of our seats. As viewer numbers soared, so did something else, and it was about to change everything. You know what's scarier than zombies? Negotiations. While we were all busy freaking out over walkers, the real drama was happening behind the scenes. The Walking Dead had become a pop culture phenomenon, but with that success came complications. When a show blows up like The Walking Dead did, suddenly everyone wants a bigger piece of the pie. Actors start thinking they're irreplaceable, agents throw around words like fair market value, and the network tries to keep the show running without breaking the bank. It's a recipe for disaster, and The Walking Dead was about to serve it up. Remember Shane, Rick's best friend turned nemesis? Obviously you do, that's a joke, but Jon Bernthal knocked it out of the park with that role. But then, poof, he's gone. Dale, the moral compass of the group, Jeffrey DeMond, gave him so much depth, but nope, zombie chow. And literally do not even get me started with Andrea. Now, I'm not saying every character death was because of contract disputes, but come on, the timing of some of these exits was definitely suspicious. Fan favorites were dropping like flies, and we were left wondering, is this really for the story, or is someone's agent playing hardball? This revolving door of characters started to mess with our heads. Just when you'd get attached to someone, bam, they're walker food. It got to the point where
I think Shane's death, even if it was like a contract dispute between John and the showrunners or whatever, I think, that was still perfect. And, it just him dying so early on too makes it like, and us getting just very little amount of time with him, and just the little amount of time that we did get with him being like so like basically perfect, it does so much for the show.
You'd be afraid to like a new character because you knew they probably wouldn't last that long. At first, this willingness to kill anyone seemed like a strength. No one was safe, just like in a real apocalypse. But here's the problem. When you keep offing major characters, it's hard for the audience to stay invested. We need someone to root for, someone to follow through this mess of a world. And when you're constantly introducing new faces just to replace the ones you've killed off, it gets exhausting. The deaths of beloved characters started to feel less like meaningful narrative choices and more like shock tactics. Critics caught on, pointing out that these deaths seemed driven by contractual conflicts and the need to inject excitement into the otherwise dull writing. When your big dramatic moments start feeling hollow, you know you've got a problem. And let's talk about fan reactions for a second. Remember when Carl bit the dust? Because I do, and if you want to see a video all about that, I'm going to link it up here because I hated that death. The point is, it was a huge turning point. The episode following his death lost 2 million viewers. It showed just how emotionally invested fans were into these characters and how badly the show could mess up by mishandling their stories. And they mishandled Carl's really freaking badly because he was the ending to the comics. I'm not going to get too heated about that in this video. That's, again, go up there. But the showrunners even admitted that they sometimes used character deaths as plot devices to keep viewers interested. But here's the thing, when you do that too often, it backfires. We stopped feeling the impact of these deaths because we were always expecting them. The emotional stakes of the story, gone, reduced to atoms, like half the universe in that other big franchise. As it turns out, killing beloved characters wasn't the only way The Walking Dead was losing its soul. Remember how the show's tone seemed to shift more often than a walker's appetite? There's a reason for that, and it starts with 2 words: Frank Darabont. You know how some TV shows feel like they have a consistent vision from start to finish? Yeah, The Walking Dead is just not one of those shows. It all started when AMC decided to fire Frank Darabont, the, at the time, showrunner, right after season 1. Talk about setting the tone for instability. Darabont was the visionary who brought The Walking Dead to life. He had a clear idea of what this series should be and fought hard, I mean very hard, you should have seen some of the stuff that came out after, to maintain quality and integrity of the show. But apparently AMC had different ideas. They wanted to cut the budget and have more control over the creative direction, and just like that, the man who started it all was out the door. From that point on, The Walking Dead became a revolving door of showrunners, each bringing their own vision to the series. And you could see that on screen. Under Glenn Mazzara, the show ramped up the action and gore. Scott Gimple's tenure saw a shift towards more philosophical storytelling and character-focused episodes, and those were very controversial. And even Angela Kang tried to recapture some of the early seasons' intensity. It's enough to give you whiplash, and trust me, the fans noticed this. But the changing showrunners weren't the only problem. AMC was pulling...
It's kind of like Doctor Who. Like, there's always a new showrunner every few seasons. And, you know, some fans like certain seasons, and some doctors, and other fans don't. And yeah, it's like Jerry said, it's whiplash.
Strings behind the scenes, and not in a good way. They kept slashing the budget, forcing the creative team to do more with less. Remember those epic zombie hordes from the early seasons? They became a lot rarer as the show went on. Instead, we got more bottle episodes focused on just a few characters. Cheaper to produce, sure, but not exactly what fans tune in for. AMC's creative interference went beyond budget cuts. They'd completely overhaul storylines or force certain plot.
You know what's interesting? Usually bottle episodes are my favorite because they're usually very well written and the characters, you know, they do a very good job with the characters. So that's kind of funny that bottle episodes are not, the fan base usually don't really like it.
Points. The showrunners were caught between telling compelling stories and keeping the network happy. This constant tug of war resulted in...
And I understand why too, like it doesn't progress the story as much as they should. But yeah, normally I do like bottle episodes.
In disjointed storytelling, with storylines being set up and then abandoned, and character development becoming just straight up inconsistent. And don't even get me started about the pacing issues. 1 minute, we're crawling along, examining the moral implications of survival. The next, we're racing through plot points faster than a walker can shamble. It's like the show couldn't decide what it wanted to be from one season to the next. All this behind-the-scenes drama contributed to The Walking Dead's downfall in ways that weren't obvious to initial viewers. Sure, we could see changes on screen, but we didn't know the full story. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car is your favorite TV show and the crash is happening for several years. And if behind-the-scenes drama was the slow motion crash, then Negan was the brick wall we slammed into at full speed. The most anticipated villain in the show's history somehow became its biggest liability. How did The Walking Dead fumble what should have been its crowning achievement? The build-up to Negan's arrival was intense. The show had been teasing this guy for what felt like forever. Comic book fans were hyped, casual viewers were intrigued, and everyone was on the edge of their seats. The Walking Dead had set expectations sky high, promising the baddest of the bad, the villain to end all villains. And when he finally showed up in that season 6 finale, oh boy did he make an entrance. But here's the thing about grand entrances, they're tough to follow up on. Negan's introduction was brutal, controversial, and got everyone talking. It was a cliffhanger that left fans furious and desperate for more, but then the show fumbled the ball hard. The Savior arc, which should have been The Walking Dead's magnum opus, turned into a slog. What started as intense and thrilling quickly became repetitive and frustrating. The show fell into a predictable pattern. Rick and co. would try to fight back, Negan would show up with his bat and his grin and rinse and repeat. It's like the writers found a formula they thought worked and decided to stick with it until viewers begged for mercy. And during the Negan era, the walkers might as well have been extras. The focus shifted almost entirely to human versus human conflict, and not really in a good way. The nuanced character development we'd come to love, gone, replaced by our heroes making cartoonish villain monologues and our heroes making bafflingly stupid decisions just to keep the plot moving. The pacing became a major issue. Episodes that should have been heart-pounding became yawn-inducing. The show would spend entire episodes focusing on minor characters or side plots, killing any momentum that it had built up. This approach stretched out the story, but it added filler instead of depth. The impact on viewership was undeniable. The Walking Dead lost a staggering 3 million viewers in one season. People who had been diehard fans since the beginning were tuning out in droves, and what should have been the show's high point became the beginning of its decline. The real kicker? The show seemed to realize its mistake, but instead of course correcting, they doubled down. Negan stuck around long past his expiration date, becoming less of a terrifying villain and more of an ineffective antagonist. The writers tried to give him a redemption arc, but by then, many viewers had already checked out, and even if, like me, thought it was good, it's still undeniable that they spanned out seasons 7 and 8 so much that it didn't matter. Looking back, it's clear that the Negan arc marked a turning point in the show's writing quality. The tight, character-driven storytelling of earlier seasons gave way to shock value and drawn-out conflicts. The Walking Dead had always been at its best when it balanced action with thoughtful exploration of human nature in extreme circumstances, but somewhere along the way, it lost that balance. The Walking Dead was facing a crisis far greater than any zombie horde. Andrew Lincoln, the show's lead since the beginning, was ready to leave. In a series where no one's safe, could the show itself survive without its main protagonist? For 8 seasons, Andrew Lincoln had been the heart of The Walking Dead, but in 2018 he announced his departure. This wasn't just any cast change, it was a seismic shift for the entire series, and it came on the heels of another major loss. Carl Grimes, Rick's son, had already been killed off only a few episodes prior. So the writers now faced a monumental challenge. How do you continue a story when you've lost both your main character and his natural successor? It's not an easy task, and the solution they came up with was, well, let's just say it was unusual. Instead of killing Rick off, they had him airlifted away in a helicopter to an unknown location. It was a convoluted plot device that many fans felt confused by. A helicopter in the middle of a zombie apocalypse? It felt like the desperate attempt to keep the door open for Lincoln's.
And then they fumbled the bag with the show, with The Ones Who Live.
potential return, logic be damned. And with Rick gone, the show introduced new characters to fill the void. We got Magna and her group, the Whisperers, and we even saw Judith step into a bigger role, but these newcomers, despite their merits, couldn't quite replicate the gravitas that Rick or even Carl brought to the series, because you shouldn't have killed.
And to be fair, I think it's just because they actually didn't really do much with them as well. Same with like in the comics, like Magna was kind of built up to be this important character. Nothing happened with her. And yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. But even with the show, like they did more, but they didn't do very much.
Both of them off, but whatever. That's not the point of this video. Regardless, The Walking Dead struggled to find its footing in this new era. The tight focus on survival and moral dilemmas that defined the earlier seasons had become diluted. Complex character relationships built over the years were disrupted. The show seemed to be constantly reinventing itself, never quite sure of its new identity. Fans noticed this shift, and viewership declined sharply. People who had stuck with the show through its ups and downs were finally losing interest. It wasn't that new storylines were necessarily bad, they just lacked the emotional anchor that Rick and Carl could have provided. Losing key cast members impacts more than just the cast list. It can shake a show to its very core. Rick and Carl weren't just characters, they were the emotional center of The Walking Dead. Their journey was what kept viewers invested week after week. And when they left, they took a significant part of the show's identity with them, leaving both characters and the audience to navigate a changed landscape. And as The Walking Dead struggled to find its footing without its core characters, AMC had the brilliant idea of more zombies, because if there's one thing viewers love more than watching their favorite characters get killed off, it's seeing the same premise rehashed 5 different ways, right? Well, AMC certainly thought so. Their logic was simple. If one zombie show could capture lightning in a bottle, why not try to replicate success? And so began the zombie expansion. Fear the Walking Dead was just the beginning, and before we knew it, we had The World Beyond, we had Tales of the Walking Dead, Walking Dead Dead City, and Daryl Dixon, and The Ones Who Live.
Dude, their titles, people complain about the title Fear the Walking Dead, but dude, The Walking Dead, Dead City, The Ones Who Live, such terrible titles. Tales of the Walking Dead, I'll say, it's understandable, that kind of makes sense. Walking Dead, World Beyond, I don't have too much of a problem with that, but The Walking Dead, but originally it was called Isle of the Dead. That was a great title. The Walking Dead, Dead City is horrendous, and yeah, I just don't understand. I'm baffled by how they could have. Fear the Walking Dead also makes sense. I like that. Yeah, anyway.
AMC seemed determined to explore every possible angle of the apocalypse. But here's the thing about zombies. They might be mindless, but viewers aren't. As AMC started pumping out these spin-offs, the main show began to feel less special. It's like when your favorite band suddenly releases 5 albums in a year. Sure, you're getting more content, but at what cost? Resources and attention were divided across multiple series. Writers who might have been working on improving the main show were now spread thin. Plot points that could have added depth to the original story were being saved for spin-offs, and The Walking Dead's universe was expanding, but was it actually improving? Fans started complaining about zombie fatigue, and understandably so. It's one thing to turn in once a week for your favorite zombie fix, but keeping track of multiple series became just overwhelming. The sheer volume of Walking Dead content was exhausted even for diehard fans like me, and probably like you too. Some spin-offs fared better than others. Fear the Walking Dead found its footing after a rocky start, even though I hated it. World Beyond felt like a teen drama set in the apocalypse, and Tales of the Walking Dead was inconsistent at best, and fans were left wondering if they needed to watch every spin-off to understand the main show's plot, or if characters would suddenly appear in different series. The franchise, just simply put, became bloated, diluting the impact of the original show. Do you remember when The Walking Dead was event television, with each new episode sparking social media debates and theories? Now with so many shows competing for attention, that excitement was just spread thin. The special quality that made The Walking Dead great was barely recognizable. So what role did these spin-offs play in diluting the main show's appeal? They oversaturated the market, divided the fan base's attention and loyalty, and ultimately took away from the focused, character-driven storytelling about survival in an impossible world that made The Walking Dead special in the first place. As if competing with its own spin-offs wasn't enough, The Walking Dead faced an enemy far more terrifying than any zombie: budget cuts. You'd think surviving a zombie apocalypse would be the hardest part, but try surviving network penny pitching. How did these cuts change the very DNA of the show we once knew and loved? Remember those epic zombie hordes from the early seasons? The ones that made you hold your breath and wonder how Rick and the gang would possibly survive? Well, those days are just long gone. Now we're lucky if we catch a glimpse of a walker's ankle shuffling across the screen. What happened? AMC decided to tighten the purse strings, and that's what, really. As the seasons went on, The Walking Dead's budget got slashed hard. This led to a shift in the show's focus, with more episodes centered on just a few characters in limited locations. And while this approach can work for some shows, it's not exactly what you'd expect from a series about surviving a zombie apocalypse. The epic scale of the earlier seasons just disappeared. The massive set pieces, hundreds of extras in zombie makeup, and the blockbuster-worthy action sequences became a thing of the past. Instead, we got smaller scale conflicts and less impressive zombie encounters. It's like the show forgot what made it exciting in the first place. And to compensate for the lack of action, the show started...
And that's kind of due to how, Jerry talked about earlier, being so many different showrunners, so many different writers working on the show. One thing I give credit for, this is kind of a tangent, but one thing I kind of give credit for, dude, I forgot the name now. It's by Rod Serling. He died in like the 1950s or something like that. The Twilight Zone. I don't know how I forgot the name. The Twilight Zone has so many different cast members. I think so many different writers as well. But one thing that stayed consistent is Rod Serling, and throughout all 5 seasons of the original run. And yeah, it gave such a, even though every episode was like very different, there was still this consistency to it.
Relying more on dialogue. Now, don't get me wrong, good dialogue is essential for character development and storytelling, but when you're watching The Walking Dead, you're not tuning in for a deep dive into the moral implications of survival. You want to see at least some zombie action, right? Believe me, the fans noticed these changes too. The drop in production quality was hard to ignore. The intricate zombie makeups that used to make you squeam, they became less detailed, more generic, and the expansive locations that made the world feel vast and dangerous were just replaced by a few of the same sets over and over again. The Walking Dead went from being this groundbreaking series that pushed the boundaries of what TV could do to, well, just another drama. Sure, there were still zombies, but they felt more like an afterthought than the driving force of the show, and it's not what longtime fans signed up for. These budget constraints didn't just affect the visuals, they impacted the storytelling too. Without the resources to film big dramatic sequences, the writers had to rely on more conflict between characters to create tension. And while that can work for a while, it starts to feel repetitive when it's all you've got. Like, how many times can you watch our heroes argue about whether to trust newcomers or fight other survivors before it gets old? Like, you'd think that surviving a zombie apocalypse would be enough to keep things interesting, but The Walking Dead just found a way to make even the end of the world feel predictable. Let's talk about how a show that...
And that's what I think Fear the Walking Dead Season 3 does very well, bringing in the whole water aspect and these feuds that even came before the apocalypse too, because obviously in The Walking Dead, every feud basically is, except for like Rick and Shane's. I mean, Rick and Shane were like friends before, so they weren't really even feuding before that. But almost every, so I guess you could say Daryl and Merle's, but almost every feud in The Walking Dead is like after the apocalypse. But there was like in Season 3, we had feuds that were before the apocalypse with obviously Cal Taka and Jeremiah, their people, but even Victor and Dante, and even Celia Flores and Victor in Season 2. So there were so many of these, and obviously the Season 1 too, I guess, but. Yeah, there's so many of these feuds that were before the apocalypse, or that started before the apocalypse, that made the show interesting or unique in that aspect.
at once had us on the edge of our seats turned into a snooze fest that even the most diehard fans couldn't ignore. The Walking Dead storylines just became so repetitive that you could practically set your watch by them. New season, same old song and dance. Our heroes find a safe place, realize it's not safe for long after all, and fight some bad humans, and then do it all over again. It's like the writers found a formula and decided to stick with it until the wheels just fell off. And oh boy, those wheels were already wobbling. The show's predictability extended to structure of individual episodes. 15 minutes.
And that's one thing that people complain about Fear the Walking Dead. It's like, oh, they barely stay at a community for too long. But that freshens it up, because The Walking Dead is like, oh, they stay at a community. They stay there for a bit, and then, it gets destroyed, and then they stay there for a bit, and it gets destroyed. Other than Alexandria, obviously, but even Alexandria gets destroyed every once in a while, so.
Minutes in, a character would make a stupid decision that puts everyone in danger. 30 minutes in, cue the heartfelt monologue about the nature of humanity. 45 minutes in, you guessed it, zombie attack out of nowhere. And I get it. When you've got a show, you don't want to mess with the recipe too much. But there's a difference between comfort food and eating the same exact meal every day for years. The Walking Dead crossed that line, and it kept on walking. The writers did try to shake things up. I will give them that, but more often than not, they'd fall back on the same old tropes we'd seen a million times. How many new groups of survivors can show up before it starts feeling like a post-apocalyptic version of the real world? Then came the Whisperers, and finally we had something different. People wearing zombie skin suits blended in with the walkers. It was definitely creepy, it was fresh, but it was too little too late. By the time Alpha and her crew showed up, a lot of longtime fans had already checked out. The Walking Dead wasn't must-see TV anymore. It was more like, oh yeah, I guess that's still on TV. And the show was caught in this weird limbo, trying to balance what fans expected with the need for fresh storytelling, but it's hard to surprise people when they could see the plot twists coming from a mile away. The writers seemed to be focused on just filling in the blanks with slightly different names and locations each season. And you want to know what really drove viewers away? It was the feeling that nothing mattered anymore. Characters would die, but we'd already seen so many deaths that it just lost its impact. New locations would be introduced, but we knew they'd be gone in a few episodes, and even the zombies, the whole reason for the show's existence, started to feel like an afterthought. And do you remember Negan, the big bad who was supposed to change everything? Well, his storyline just dragged on for so long that by the end, fans were begging for someone to just take a swing at him with Lucille and be done with it. And again, you gotta remember, I'm talking about the general consensus. I loved Negan, but this is objectively true. And at that, don't even get me wrong about the whole Carl got bit fiasco. Talk about throwing away years of character development for just a cheap shock. The Walking Dead's decline was a dramatic downward spiral. When AMC announced the final season, fans were left pondering, was this a mercy killing or a last-ditch effort for relevance? And more importantly, could anything salvage the legacy of a show that had lost its way so spectacularly? The final season of The Walking Dead was a challenging endeavor to say the least, and AMC's announcement of the show's conclusion elicited mixed reactions from the fans. Some felt relief, as if a long-suffering situation was finally being addressed, and others clung to hope, wondering if the
I think that's good to end it off here. Jerry made a good video here. I'll link down below his video in the description. But, one thing that is tragic about The Walking Dead now, the whole franchise now, at least in the show universe, is that if we get a passionate writer for The Walking Dead, like Dave Erickson, who, co-started Fear the Walking Dead with Robert Kirkman, if we get a passionate writer for The Walking Dead, and they want to write this really good story and everything, it's going to be ruined by the company AMC and Scott Gimple. Scott Gimple is going to put his dirty hands all over it, and and Scott Gimple, he gets a lot of hate, but he did some good stuff too. But I think corporate wise, he's not very smart, he's not very smart, but his decisions are, I disagree with him, I'll say. I say he's not very smart. Obviously, he's smart enough to get into that position. So he's doing something right? If we get a passionate writer, AMC is going to ruin it. AMC is going to be like, no, we're going to try to make it like MCU, or we're going to try to make this into a big thing, into a big franchise, into a big show, kind of just like how, merge the shows or whatever. And we're not going to get stories like that anymore. Telly Walden for doing the Walking Dead Clementine comics, She's not a passionate writer about The Walking Dead. She does not care about The Walking Dead. We're not gonna get any good stuff for The Walking Dead in a long time. So hope you guys enjoy. Subscribe, like for more, and bye, so.